All right, folks, we are back, and we are joined again on the show by David Solway, Canadian poet and essayist. Hello, David.
Hi, Steve. How's it going?
And good, and big hockey fan as well, hockey aficionado, I should say, correct?
Correct, except I'm very disappointed with the Montreal Canadiens, and I know that you're very pleased with the New Jersey Devils.
No, I'm not. Right? Well, I'm not very pleased with the New Jersey Devils. No, I'm pleased. I don't know how they beat St. Louis 7-1 last night.
Did they really? I didn't hear that.
Oh, yeah, 7-1. 7 different goal scores. That means those 7 people aren't due to score again until, I think, May. It's incredible,
yeah,
but...
Well, your team is going to be in the Stanley Cup Finals, I think.
The Blues, yeah, very well could be. Very well.
You're for the Blues, are you? I thought you were for the Devils.
No. I'm a Devils fan, but I don't understand how they beat them. I mean, they don't score more than 2 goals a game ever.
Dude, they don't need more than 2 goals a game with Marty Brodeur.
Well, but here's the thing, Marty has not been playing a lot of the games. I always say Corey Schneider, but it's not Corey Schneider. Schneider is. I'm drawing a total blank. It is Corey Schneider. Corey Schneider.
Yeah, he was with Vancouver before.
Yeah, he's playing a lot of the games now. Brodeur played in Montreal, then he didn't play again until Phoenix, and all the other games have been Schneider. And Schneider hasn't given up more than 2 goals in his last 7 or 8 starts. So they have two top-notch goalies, but they can't score. So that's why they're. If the season ended today, they'd be out of the wild card as well as the top 3 in the division, which I don't like that format to begin with.
No, I agree. But they'll be in there somewhere.
Maybe. The Rangers blew a 3-1 lead over the Islanders yesterday and lost 4-3, although Lundqvist was home sick. So, see, we could talk hockey instead of politics. I don't.
I have to confide in you now, Steve. It's a little secret.
Yes.
I grew up in a small town in northern Quebec, a French Canadian town, and my greatest desire and ambition as a young guy and as a student in the high school there and so on was to become a goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens.
Wow!
And so I played goal, and I still bear some of the scars because we didn't wear masks at that time.
Wow!
And I think I would have been a much happier man than I am now if I'd actually pursued that career. And we're now, instead of Carey Price, it would be me in those days. Or I'd be the goaltender coach by this time.
Hey, by the way, it reminds me, one more hockey note, because it segues right into the politics. The IOC made the women's goalie for the U.S. Olympic hockey team take she had on the back of her helmet, it said it said U.S. Constitution or the Constitution, and I don't know what it had. And they made her take it off. They made her change the whole helmet because that was too political. But, the dead Israeli athletes to this day have never been honored by that IOC because they're a bunch of feckless morons.
Exactly.
But they take the Constitution off this woman's hat, and that's going to preserve the spirit of the Olympics.
Presumably. I mean, they won't even let a Jewish soccer player with one of the British teams into Dubai.
Right.
The IOC is simply it's a scam right from the beginning. It's a money-making organization. It's as corrupt as American politics is at present and has always been corrupt. But it's getting worse and worse. And one of the reasons for that is because it's largely a European phenomenon. And the Europeans are autocrats, as we know right from the start. The EU is run by an autocratic organization in Brussels that is unelected and that responds or answers to no one. And so is the IOC. I like to stay away from all things European now. And I was so pro-European once, having lived there for some time.
Well, I got to tell you, your piece at American Thinker, the Reign of Collective Stupidity, I'm sure it permeates, all over. And you talk about this, this rally against the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, and the person in the crowd who was asked by your friend or whatever, what do you protest? What did he do wrong? What is it you don't like about him? And she said, I don't know. And that is, I got to tell you, and but I'm just saying it for the benefit of the people out there. So I have come up against that so many times in arguments with, at the kitchen table or the dinner table or in a restaurant or whatever, which I shouldn't argue, and I get carried away. But sometimes, and I say, well, and they don't know. They don't know why they didn't like Bush. They don't know why they didn't like this one. They don't know why they don't like that one. They just know they don't like them because that's how they're supposed to be.
Exactly. You see them in every zombie movie. And it's unfortunate because zombification is increasing by leaps and bounds everywhere we look. Now, I mean, I was a teacher for many years at a college. I was a visiting professor in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe. I've had lots of contact with faculty, with staff, and of course with many, many students. And I must say that I did meet some very interesting faculty members, and I did meet some brilliant students. But they were in a dramatic minority. The amount of collective stupidity I ran into, the inability to think clearly, not just to think clearly, Steve, but even to acknowledge the existence of facts when you bring it before them, struck me as some kind of, how shall I put it, a kind of modern bubonic plague. You know, we speak about the Black Plague in the early medieval period. There is a kind of Black Plague now. I don't understand why it should be. With the internet and access to university available to almost everybody, there should be an explosion of knowledge, of understanding, and of clear logical thinking. Instead, quite ironically, the very opposite has taken place. And it seems the more universities and the more internet and the more newspapers and the more information that is out there, the more disinformation that is out there, so that the ratio between disinformation and information is very much in favor of the former. So this is one of the great ironies of the modern age, is that with the access to knowledge that is available to all of us, if only we invest a little bit of time and a little bit of interest, we could actually be the most well-informed and perhaps even the most brilliant generation ever to have graced the surface of the earth.
Yeah. No,
and in fact, it's just the opposite.
It is, and you steal. And we're talking to David Solway, a Canadian poet and essayist, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. And you use the term "low information voters." Did you get that from Rush?
Well, actually, I use the term "no information voters." Low information voters actually came not from Rush. He picked it up. I think I mentioned this in my article. It was a term actually invented or coined by Samuel Popkin way back in a book called The Reasoning Voter, Communication and Persuasion in Presidential Campaigns.
Yes, yes.
And then people like Rush and Bill Maher and Jonah Goldberg picked it up. And I thought, yeah, sure, there are all these low information voters, but what is even worse, there are all these no information voters around. You know,
so you do address this, and you ask the question: how did we get into this whole situation? How did this happen?
Well, it's a long story, and I don't think we have time for this in an interview. But for anyone who's interested, you have to go back to the 1920s. You have to go back to John Dewey and his trial-centered was called then progressive education. Isn't it ironic too? Now we have our progressivists who are really communists in disguise. But then Dewey coined the term progressive education, which put the onus on the teacher to somehow comply with the students' needs and demands. We see this, we saw this in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when instead of bringing Shakespeare into class, you brought the Beatles. Now, the Beatles are great, but the Beatles aren't Shakespeare, and that's not what you pick up in a class. It was a dumbing down that began around the time of John Dewey, and no doubt there are antecedents before that, and people who know more than I do could probably spell that out. But if you read John Dewey, who was very much, today we would call, on the left, and his emphasis on the fact that the teacher was simply an adjunct and the child was someone who had to be catered to, as if the child bore some kind of ancestral wisdom within him. That is actually, and if I can take you back further, that is a romantic idea. It goes back to Wordsworth. The child is father of the man. It goes back to Shelley. It goes back to the romantic poets of the 19th century, to William Blake also, who was anti-industrialization and so on. And that romantic fallacy has carried over into the modern age, into modern education, into the progressivist ideology, the whole idea of a utopian future open to mankind, which has been, proven wrong, disastrously wrong, time after time after time, the whole socialist experiment, in other words, which is why Europe is going under now and America may be going under.
Well, that's what I want. I'm glad that's what I wanted to get to. Where does this set us up to go to next? In other words, if this isn't dealt with, if this isn't turned around, if this continues to permeate and to grow and to become more and more commonplace, what does that say for the future of your country and this country?
It says very little that would give us much hope. I'm actually very pessimistic about things, about that kind of thing. I don't see how we can get an epistemological conversion across the entire culture. I don't see it happening now. That's why I conclude my article, as I have some of my books, in fact, with the notion that about the only educational device that is going to work is catastrophe. I don't think anything else is going to work. We have to get hit hard with an economic implosion, with people in the streets who can't cash in their food stamps, with maybe an EMP attack somewhere. Something disastrous has got to happen before people pick themselves up, those of us who are left, and say, oh my God, we were so wrong. We better do something about reconstituting ourselves. But there's no guarantee that even under those circumstances, reintegration will be possible. But I do think that the only kind of education that's going to work now, because we've gone so far down the road, really we have. I mean, I see it everywhere. As a teacher or former teacher, I quit early because I just couldn't take it anymore. But as a former teacher and as a writer and someone who travels and gives lectures and talks to people all over the world, I see this happening at breakneck speed, historically speaking. So, I don't know, sometimes I think, as in that book, A Canticle for Leibowitz, that sort of SF book that was written in the 60s by Walter J. Miller Jr., after a nuclear attack, what's left? Little points of light, little kind of monastic enclaves where wisdom and knowledge are preserved, but it's in a kind of overwhelming darkness. So when you look at a map, you look at a satellite vision, let's say of North Korea, you've probably seen that. There are hardly any lights. There's a little pinpoint of light, which is, a capital city here or another little city there, and the rest is darkness. And then you look, let's say, at Canada or the U.S. from a satellite, and you see lights everywhere. Now, these lights are going out one by one by one. And what I'm really afraid of, is metaphorically, at some point in the future, maybe not in our lifetimes, but possibly in our kids' lifetimes or their kids, for sure, when you look at a satellite image of Canada or the U.S. or most of the European countries,
you won't see the lights.
Especially in Scandinavia, you're not going to see much light.
Yeah. I'll tell you, and you're talking metaphorically in other words, but when you say EMP attack, I'm telling you, everybody I talk to, they say, what are you most afraid of? I say, our grid is going to go down one way or another. I'm so convinced of that because, I've heard Trent Franks, our congressman here in the United States, talk about it at a speech that he gave, and it's so easy to fix, and for whatever reason, we won't fix it, and I think I've scared the heck out of my kid inadvertently. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm really afraid of that, too. John Bolton and I have been in touch about that.
Well, he's a good. I'm going to speak to John on Monday again. We have him on every week. Anyway, David, I'm out of time, but great conversation. Look forward to the next one, sir.
Okay.
And maybe we'll talk about the ENP. Okay, great.
Okay.
David Solway, ladies and gentlemen, Canadian poet and essayist, and Montreal Canadiens fan. Yes, indeedy. Gomez. Anyway, I don't want to get into the whole thing. Okay, Scott Gomez went there before he went to. Well, long story. Don't have time for it. Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax TV and radio.